Hello and welcome to,
It's your time you're wasting.
and this week we're going to talk about Ofsted.
Well, before we do that, last week we forgot to get everybody to subscribe and things like that.
Subscribe and ring that bell and what else?
The
Like,
things, do the
like
things.
things. Please
Yeah,
like.
yeah. And if you're listening to this on a podcast,
Five
don't
stars.
worry. Oh, is that what they do?
They can put 5 stars on there. Yeah.
Okay. How's your week been, Martin? For those of you that can't see Martin, he's wearing a rather fetching Motorhead t-shirt. He looks pretty dapper.
Rock and roll.
Yeah. How's
I'm
your
not
week been?
I'm not showing a hairy chest though, am I?
What
Unlike
are you
some.
saying?
Unlike some.
Am I showing hair?
There is hair
Right.
there.
All right.
Is it meant
Sorry.
to be there?
I'll do a button up.
Does
Sorry.
it
It's
surprise you that you might have
concession
hair?
to the wedding. No, the wedding, the weather, not the wedding.
You had a hairy chest because of a wedding. This
Okay.
needs to be explored.
You still haven't told me about your week.
Well, it's your week seems to be far more interesting than mine, with your
Yeah.
hairy chest and your wedding.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this week, Martin's a very private man. He's not going to tell us anything about his week. But something that did happen this week is the consultation period on Ofsted's proposed changes is now over. And I'll just give you a quick recap of what those proposed reforms are going to be. So at the top, we've got the elimination of single word judgments, sort of.
Yeah, it's not really
Sort of.
that, is it? It's adding
Yeah.
more single words. If anything, add
Yeah.
a couple of two
Well,
words.
if they're not single, if we're having more single words, they're clearly not single.
Well, they are
So
together. Well,
yeah, multi-word judgments. That's what we're getting. So
multi-single
instead
word.
of a school being as was outstanding, inadequate, requires improvement, or good, they'll now be different things on a whole suite of stuff, and people will have to work out for themselves whether they think, on balance, the school is any cop. So the idea there is that the new scale ranges from it's 5 points, ranging from causing concern
In the
to
red. In the
attention
red.
needed in the red, attention needed, which is yellow,
Oh, yeah,
and
amber.
then
More amber.
yeah, ambery, and
Orange.
then there's some other colours on there. There's
Green. It's all
secure.
green.
Secure is the new good. Strong and in very dark green, almost black. Controversially, interestingly, is the new category of exemplary. So that's the proposed 5-point scales. We've got thoughts on that. We'll talk about that in a bit later. There's this idea of report cards that there will be 11 evaluation areas, including things like you'd expect, like leadership and curriculum, but also things like attendance, support for disadvantaged pupils, and they will be evaluated. Those 11 areas will all be on that 5-point scale, and then there's an additional safeguarding element, which is binary. It's pass or fail, met or not met. There's going to be more focus on context, which is probably a good thing, and also greater emphasis on the inclusion agenda, thinking about children with special educational needs, what we discussed last week, Martin, of course, and so this is all in expected and set to be implemented from November 2025, this November. So that's the timeline. Now, it's not entirely uncontroversial, I think it's fair to say. So there's quite a bit of stakeholder opposition. So one independent consultation found that nearly 90% of respondents, including teachers and parents, rejected the proposed 5-point grading scale. they expressed concerns about the feasibility of accurate assessments during brief inspections on 11 different areas. And the unions aren't happy, are they, Martin?
No, so we've got Daniel Kabedi, who's the General Secretary of the National Education Union, for one,
Yeah.
who said the case for fundamental reform to our accountability system has never been clearer. We have a system that is far too high stakes, too punitive, and too burdensome, and it is driving too many leaders, teachers, and support staff from the profession. I mean, you know, I think we could agree with a lot around that over the years, that it has been very burdensome to schools. I mean, it's
Very
extraordinary.
burdensome. Yeah, I think that's fair. That there's a certainly a quantity of what schools do is driven by what they think Ofsted want them to do, rather
And
than what
it's
they've been.
also a game of smoke and mirrors a lot of the time, that you're actually trying to um, make the best argument for your school and try and hide away the ones that perhaps could let it down sometime.
Yeah,
Anyway,
for sure.
you know,
Yeah, no,
and
absolutely.
which is why they
It's
try to
definitely a
do.
game.
That's why they try to do no notice inspections and things like that. But then basically schools are on the lookout for when their year comes, because they worked out, oh, it's 3 years or whatever it
Yeah.
is, you know. So we're on high alert all that year.
High alert for like a whole year or
Yeah.
more. Yeah, no,
So
absolutely.
the pressure is even worse than before, perhaps. The
Possibly.
proposals on the table, he says, from Ofsted and the DFE do little to address the deep problems and risk making the working conditions of teachers, leaders, and support staff worse. Of particular concern are the colour coded 5 point scale, which
Yeah.
retains the reductive cliff edge judgments that have been shown to be so harmful for our members' mental health and well-being. And the grading approach, combined with a new complex framework covering up to 11 evaluation areas, risks making inspections even less reliable than they currently are. And I think, again, that's quite fair.
Yeah, yeah. We'll talk a little bit about reliability as we go on, but yeah, that seems like a fair point.
And it's why today the NEU, alongside other organisations, leaders, etc., and Professor Julia Walters, who we'll come to in a second, are calling on the Secretary of State to delay the reforms to school inspection. It is essential that time is taken to listen to the concerns of the profession and get change right.
Yeah, so in case you've forgotten, Julia Walters is the sister of
Waters.
Ruth Perry, who uh, tragically took her life following an Ofsted inspection, where her school was downgraded to special measures because it failed safeguarding requirements. And so Julia Walters has been, I really, yeah, Julia Walters, not Julie, no relation to Julie. Julia Walters,
It's Waters
Walters,
as well.
Julia
Yeah.
Waters. Oh, it's difficult, isn't it? Sorry,
Waters.
Julia Waters. Yeah, has been quite prominent in her critique of Ofsted, and she certainly said that the proposed changes are rushed, the timelines rushed, and she doesn't think they should go ahead with it. She's not impressed with the replacing the single word ratings with color coded report cards. I don't think it's the colors anyone cares about. I think it's the concept of the cards, particularly. She thinks that's superficial, and it doesn't tackle the underlying culture of shame and job insecurity. And I think particularly if you're a head teacher whose school fails an Ofsted inspection, you are going to be worried about job security for sure, and shame definitely drives people's mental health. That seems like a reasonable thing to say. So she also thinks that despite everything, neither Ofsted nor the DfE have properly acknowledged Ruth Perry's death in the consultation documents. And this despite the coroners at her inquest warning about the risk of future tragedies unless change takes place. So that's Professor Waters. And obviously, that's a hugely emotive lever that she pulls there with her sister's tragic death. But ultimately, that's what's at stake, isn't it? People's lives, people's well-being.
Yeah, I think I mean, we should always take care when talking about a suicide and the reasons for one. But you
We
can,
should, although the coroner did say
but
that they
this is
felt
the important point
that the
that,
inspection was a direct cause,
yeah,
didn't they?
this is the important point. So it's because the coroner has made it a thing that should
Yeah,
be looked at, then puts it on a different level
for sure.
to
Yeah,
to um,
absolutely.
any tragedies that have happened in the past, or God forbid in the future. Um, Certainly, I think we should be careful about. Well, I think perhaps it is. This is a whole leadership thing. Actually, do we actually put too much power in the hands of head teachers, or too much responsibility in the hands of head teachers, that they become the big focus around Ofsted, but also around, the whole time that it's the school leader of the head teacher, rather than a more distributed leadership group, or indeed staff, or indeed
Yeah,
community,
I
etc.,
mean
or
that
indeed
does.
Matt, or whatever.
Yeah, that depends slightly on the setup. So I think if you're part of a large multi academy trust, you're very much not on your own, and maybe feel the annoyance of that at times. Maybe you
But
don't
you are with
perceive it
Ofsted.
as supportive. Pardon me?
but
Well,
but
no,
you are
I
with
don't think
Ofsted,
that's
aren't you?
true. I mean, so over the time that I worked for a large multi academy trust, I took part in around I think 12 or 13 different inspections over the 3.5 years that I was there, and trust bodies like me were just drafted in to take up the slack, and so I'd sat in many deep dive meetings with heads of English, or deep dives into reading in lots of different schools to give the trust perspective. So, and that definitely happens, I
But
think, a lot.
it's still what I'm still saying is that there is still the head teacher that takes the rap, so to speak, or is their name is the top
Yeah,
one
yeah,
when it
that
comes
is
to it. I
true.
mean, it's
That
good
is
that you're
true.
giving support like that, and Mats can offer that. It's interesting that Mats themselves don't get inspected, of course.
No, they don't, and there's some interesting arguments around that Mats are at their core a collection of schools, um, and so if you're inspecting them by not inspecting their schools, that's maybe slightly meaningless to go and inspect their sort of central teams. I don't know, but but you're right. Mats are not directly inspected as mats.
Hmm. So why? I mean, look at. Let's take a completely pretend ignorant line here. What's the point
Okay.
of Ofsted?
Well, if we follow Ofsted's own logic, that they are there to improve lives by raising standards.
Right. And do we know that they've done that?
Well, I mean, there's no possible way I think that's an unprovable statement, isn't it? So they might have improved somebody's life somewhere, but they've obviously not improved some lives. We've just been talking, obviously,
Mm,
about Ruth Perry.
yeah.
Nobody would want to claim that they'd improved her life. And there's many other people who are deeply upset, angry, bruised by their experiences with inspection over the years. We've all got our war stories, and so yeah, are they improving? I mean, I think what they're essentially saying is that they're improving the lives of children,
Mm,
in particular, both in education and don't forget social care settings as well.
mm,
And maybe, possibly, maybe there are some schools which, had they not been subject to inspection, might have been slacker. Maybe safeguarding procedures would have been less robust, and that very well might have profoundly negative impacts on young people's lives. Yeah, absolutely. So, can you prove it? Really hard. Is it
And
meaningful? Probably not.
I mean, when it comes to evidence-based, I mean, I know the last inspection regime under Amanda Spielman was very into the evidence-based approach,
Well,
and
sort of.
but not to itself. I mean,
Not to
it's
itself, yeah, not to itself, and I think it'd be good to talk a little bit about parents and their role in how Ofsted is reshaping itself. Because for me, one of the sort of profound disappointments of Amanda Spielman's tenure was that she decided to retain the 4-point grading system, and her justification was that parents wanted it,
mm,
which I always thought was pretty weak. But we've got Ofsted saying that they've conducted their own surveying of parents using a YouGov poll, and 67% of parents like their new report cards, and 86% of them say they're easy to use, and 84% really like the color coding.
yeah, it's like a spreadsheet gone mad. The color coding. Perhaps they like the colors. I mean, red,
Perhaps they do.
amber, green. It's classic traffic light reporting. What more could you have, really? Amazing stuff. I'm interested in what parents really think, because they're not being offered any alternative to it. Would you prefer this or this? you know just saying, do you like this? Yes, I do, I like that.
Yeah, I
is,
mean,
is
obviously,
is it
there's been
better than
lots of.
last, which wasn't colored coded? Is exemplary a better word than outstanding?
Of course, of course. And so, so Paul Whiteman, who's the General Secretary of the NEHT, he said, people might like the colour coding, but it's going to be of very little value if the grades and judgments are as unreliable as is anticipated. And you've also got Pepe Di Azio. I'm not sure. I've probably mispronounced that. Sorry, Pepe. He's also skeptical about the 5-point color coded system as well. And so,
Who's he? Sorry.
oh, sorry, beg pardon. He's ASCL's general secretary.
All right, ASCL. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
or as its friends like to call it, ASCL.
That's cool. You see. So our parents that, but I mean,
The
also.
Association of School and College Leaders, Martin,
Right. Thank you.
for them as
It,
does.
as a parent, as a parent has been, as we both
Yeah.
have had and perhaps still do, children in the system. Are we that bothered by reports and Ofsted judgments and things like that? I think it's not just ourselves, but I think it's something that obviously has an effect, because if you look at estate agents and what
Yeah,
they say about houses, they say, look,
yeah.
this house
Close to an
is
outstanding school.
exactly. So it certainly has an effect in that way. And in the
Yeah,
gossiping classes, perhaps who are hovering around waiting to pick their children up or something
yeah.
like that, especially when you're thinking of moving from primary to secondary, or from early
Well,
years to primary,
as
it
every
might be
school,
something you want to talk about. Oh, that's an outstanding school. I want to get my child in there. How do I do
yeah,
it?
and it's become great marketing for schools that
Yeah.
are good or outstanding. They blazon their badge on the school building so that everybody knows their Ofsted judgment, and everyone thinks they understand what it means. It's a proxy for quality, isn't it? The
Hmm.
Ofsted judgment, the single word judgment,
And it's
and
competitive. It says that we're better than that lot down the road.
yeah, and if indeed you are, yeah,
Yeah, or the other
yeah,
way around. We're worse
yeah,
than that lot up the
no,
road.
quite. So, but anyone who's tried to sort of extract meaning from the current Ofsted reports is probably has probably been in for some disappointment, because they are bland, Martin. There is not a lot of substance in there beyond those single word judgments, and the sorts of generic comments that are made about schools and how they should improve I don't think are going to be particularly useful to parents. I think those reports are largely unread. and ignored by the majority of people, apart from the poor old school leaders who pore over them, sweating buckets, trying to work out how to not run afoul of their next inspection.
Yeah. So the even if you do read it and look at it in detail, you wouldn't remember it necessarily in 3 years' time. That
As a
this is what
parent,
it meant.
no.
And have they improved? Oh, here comes the next inspection. Oh, it seems to have improved on that and that level, or whatever. You're not necessarily going to look, which is why people say that one word judgment is helpful, or the green
Yeah,
color is helpful. That parents will only remember, only look at the headline, and that'll be it. But it's such a thing that, I mean, when it first came out, I seem to remember people using the analogy of restaurants, and not just restaurant reviews, but also councils saying that this is, you shouldn't go here, it's going to poison you, and things
yeah,
like that. And
yeah,
the problem is with schools, they're not restaurants. The vast majority of parents send their child to the local school because it's easier. You know, those that don't, okay, then I think it's the first choice school. Around 80% of parents in the country get their first choice, which is usually the local school. In London, it's only 70%. So,
right.
there are 30% of parents who don't get their first choice. And I think there's people say within the first three is quite good to get that or something, which again, if you put your third choice and you get that, you're not necessarily happy with that. So people don't have, and rural areas. I mean, who's going to drive 100 miles or whatever, 50 miles to take the kid to the next school down the road, or whatever. So I think there's this strange idea that schools are like restaurants and you can choose because of, it says whatever your school is, generally you're stuck with it. And if your school is a requires improvement school, you're
Yeah,
stuck with it. If it's
yeah.
like standing school, you're stuck with it.
Oh,
Whatever it happens to be, that's it. Yes, there are a few parents who are able to buy a house within a certain area, within a catchment area, or go to church, or whatever it happens to be that they're going to use all
yeah,
their muscle to try and get their kid in to this wonderful school. So there's a bit of a Matthew effect that occurs around certain schools.
yeah, for sure. And it's still the case that the biggest predictor on schools' attainment is the socioeconomic status of its students, the level of disadvantage or advantage enjoyed by those students. And so, yeah, your best bet for school improvement is move your school to a leafy postcode,
Yeah. And
and don't take boys. That's going to help.
call it, and make sure everything's dark green, like an exemplary color. Perhaps that'll sort of
Yeah,
rub off on the
a
inspectors
very,
when they go
very
around.
dark green. Yeah, so the parent choice thing is it's a canard, Martin. It's
Hmm.
not meaningful except for a very small number of people. So parents, the idea that parents like something as well, I think is a little bit meaningless. It's that parents might like the idea of a one-word judgment or a color-coded report card, but they don't know what it means. They might think they know what it means, but they really don't. And one of the reasons that we know they don't is because it's difficult enough for people working in the field to kind of extract meaning from these things. Um,
And also, I mean, it's 2 days in a school that these
yeah,
judgments are made.
yeah,
Now, those 2 days aren't even 2 full days, because part of the second day is reporting back
yeah.
what happened,
Having
unless
me,
they need to
yeah,
look at something. When it first started, it was 5 days. It had huge teams of people would come in, go to departments, watch you teach, watch just about every teacher. I mean, it was a hell of a lot more judgment going on. Now, I'm not saying it was accurate judgment. I'm not saying it was more accurate or less accurate, but it was certainly more time spent, more data being taken
yeah.
in.
Well, we're
Whereas now
we're
it
straying
seems,
here into psychometrics, and we're thinking about you there thinking about validity of Ofsted. Can they, in the short time period that they're in a school, say anything meaningful across 11 areas? Is a good point. One of the best critiques that I've read on the Ofsted proposals has come from Tin Lunig,
yeah,
policy advisor, economist, general all round bright lad.
He
And
used to work in the DFE as well, didn't he?
yeah, he did. He did. He's done all sorts of things. And so one of the points that he made, I mean, he says in a Schools Week article, we can put a link to this in the show notes. He describes Ofsted's proposals as badly flawed, and so. And he approaches this as a psychometrician. Psychometrics is the study of how we measure things, and so one of the things that he points out here is that if you've got a longer exam, that's more reliable in terms of its outcomes than a shorter exam. So a 5-minute driving test is not going to be long enough to give you much useful data about whether someone can drive well. A 20-minute A-level exam probably wouldn't capture enough of the subjects that you could demonstrate your understanding. So length is important, and so the idea that Ofsted go in for 1.5 days, essentially, as you're saying, is an issue. But also, and I think this is a really interesting point, that the more grades you have, the greater the chance that the grade you assign is wrong. And he makes the slightly amusing observation that if GCSEs are 26 grades, nobody would reasonably expect anybody to tell the difference between a J and a K. So the reason we currently have 4 grades, and his point is that is more reliable by de facto than having 5 grades. Introducing a 5th grade by design makes the whole system less reliable.
And also the wording. I mean, at both ends, the difference between strong and exemplary is almost a nonsense, and that's for causing concern and attention needed.
Yeah.
What's the
And
difference?
it's interesting, isn't it, that the Ofsted have decided that their safeguarding report is going to be a binary met, not met. Why do they not want to do that for the rest of the report card? What is the incentive to say that schools are all these different colours? What's motivating that?
I think it's the simplicity of messaging to parents. I think that's what their justification is. Because we
But it's
talked
less
before.
simple than net not met, isn't it?
Sorry, compared to that, met not met. Yeah, but the estate agents would start to complain because house prices would collapse.
Right. Okay. So Ofsted is there serving the interests of
Of the estate agents, the housing market.
Right. Gotcha.
That must be it.
Yeah.
I mean, you
Well,
can't have, but if you've got a not met, then obviously you also want to make sure they are met as damn quickly as possible.
yeah.
So you would put a team of people in to ensure that, surely.
No,
The MAT would, in terms of a MAT, wouldn't they? And I'm sure the local authority would, in terms of an LA school, would be expected to. There is something here that you should be able to act on straight away. So if we had those 2 judgments, it would be quite interesting on the sorts of things. I mean, what are
Well,
the other things?
we're going to have those 2 judgments on safeguarding, Martin. So a school that does not meet the safeguarding requirements is going to have that published.
No, I know, right. So, but could you do the same with curriculum? Is what I'm saying. Sorry, with safeguarding, it makes sense. Could you say? You could say. You could say. No, you couldn't. You couldn't.
The required standard. Yeah.
Yeah,
you could do that.
But there's going to be within that. What level does that even take? Shall I give you an example? There was.
Yeah,
do you
give me an
remember
example.
Do you remember the first superhead?
I can't remember who they were called. Who were they?
It was something like Torsved Torgerson or something like that. He had a Norwegian sounding name. I remember that. Yeah. And he came in from a deepest,
like
darkest
a
Norfolk.
warrior swept in.
That's right, like a Viking.
Reaping and pillaging.
He came from darkest Norfolk, and he was brought into a central London, sort of inner London school.
Yeah.
And I think Channel 4
probably.
Parachuted in. Of course, he comes down by parachute. Like a bridge too far.
Combat role on landing.
And it was a Channel 4 documentary. And they filmed him coming in, and his car drove up, and obviously meetings over the summer to get the school ready for the beginning of term. and they get the whole thing together. And he gets out what we used to call in the old days a beatbox, and he has the whole of
A Rasta
school.
Blaster.
He has the whole school sat in front of him, and he puts on a CD,
Mm.
and it's With a Little Help from My Friends by the Beatles.
Ah,
And he plays this, and all these sort of urban kids are sort of staring at each other. What the hell is going on here? And it gets to the end of the assembly, and then they all go off, and there's no timetable. The idiots
okay. And
had
your
forgotten.
point is?
The idiots have forgotten to put a timetable together. The basic thing that a school needs beyond anything else is what to do after the assembly. So,
Yeah, okay, come
so
on.
utter chaos,
Link this
utter
back. Help
chaos.
me out here, Martin. How
No,
does
but
this connect?
what level is that? That is complete failure, isn't it?
Right.
That's complete failure. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the line between that is
Okay.
good, that is bad. That's what I call curriculum failure. Yeah, you
So,
could judge that, but you can't
so your
judge the
point
rest of
is,
the rest. My point is the rest of the curricula that you come across are probably shades of grey or green in this case. You know, there are it's this discontinuous thing that we talked about last week as well.
yeah.
The discontinuous mind. It's either pass or fail. I don't think you can do that with curriculum. I don't think you can. It's far more subtle a thing than that. It's an art, not a fail safe.
Okay.
You
All
know.
right. Fair enough. Fair enough. Let's agree on that for the moment. But also let's have a bit of a think about this idea of the proposed changes and what's motivating them. And obviously, lots of people unhappy with Ofsted. Lots of people sort of talking about how grim it is. But one of the people that's not saying that is Sir John Coles, the CEO of United Learning, the biggest multi-academy trust in the country, over 100 schools I think they've got now. And he says that 98% of inspections carried out by Ofsted over the last few years, United Learning have agreed with and accepted, and have been happy with the process. So, what does that tell us?
I think that's an interesting insight into something that they're probably, I don't know, but possibly doing themselves, and that is they've got an idea of how good their schools are,
Yes. Oh no, for sure. Of
and they
course.
they are working to improve those schools over a period of time, and therefore perhaps instead of the smoke and mirrors, they're actually working with the inspectorate to some extent. And I think, can I say, this is where I would tend to go with reforming Ofsted, by the way. But
Right.
again, we could come into that in a
Let's
sec,
let's talk
perhaps.
about that.
Okay, if we get
You
to a
you'd
point,
get rid of it, wouldn't you, Martin?
well, as it presently is, the government inspector turns up. You know, everyone tries to do their best to show them the school at the best and everything. It's smoke and mirrors. You don't necessarily get a true picture of the school. It's only 2 days, of which 1.5 days perhaps are spent actually inspecting, the rest of it data and collecting stuff from parents, pupils, etc., beforehand, putting together a very glib report and a one-word judgment at the top, or now 5-word judgments in different colours at the top. Um, I think you have to work with the importance is what is the quality of education in that school over a period of time.
Okay.
If there are problems in the school should know about it and should be working on it. Now
Yeah.
that would
They
be the
should.
first, should be.
Yeah.
And the inspectorate also could be a way of helping support that process. So it's
It
one of
could.
self-evaluation
Yeah.
and being open about what's going on and saying whether it's to Matt or to authority, local authority, or to inspectorate or to, DFE or whatever different
Yeah.
instruments are used, to say this is the process we're trying to go through. It takes time. We would like support and help in this instance, and this instance. And the report, if you like, every school has its own self-evaluative report as a constant. So perhaps published every year, it could be, which is done then, and perhaps put on a website or whatever, and is saying, this is the process we're going through, this is where we are, um, and this is what support we're getting, and this is how long it's going to take to do this, this, and this, whatever it happens to be.
So
Now,
you're not arguing against accountability, Martin.
not arguing against accountability, I'm saying it's more of a team effort,
Okay.
and it's less smoke and mirrors and more honest and open dialogue, and saying, yes, not everything is good here.
Yeah.
In other words, what you want for good CPD is teachers saying, I need to improve here, here, here. And it
Yeah.
needs to be that sort of mature attitude throughout the profession, if you like. We do need to
Yeah.
improve. Where do we need to improve? Right. In what order do we need to improve as well? So it becomes part of a continuous process, an
Right.
ipsative process.
An ipsit, a lovely, lovely choice of vocab there, Martin. A few years ago, I wrote a book called Intelligent Accountability, which was aimed at in helping schools to improve. But I think a lot of the ideas in there are very applicable to school inspection. And one of the points that I make there about making accountability more intelligent is that in order for that to happen, the person who is holding us to account, the inspector, has to be perceived as both honest and expert. And I think that that's one of the things which maybe undermines a lot of the way in which we respond to Ofsted. That we all fear the idea of a rogue inspector. I think that's less prevalent now than it was a few years ago, before Michael Wilshire rooted out, got rid of all of the agencies that used to supply inspectors, AIs as they were called, hilariously. I know. That's before artificial intelligence
Yeah,
existed, I think.
that'll be the next.
And so the idea of honest and expert, we've got to believe that the person holding us to account is going to do the things that they've committed to, that they're not out to get us, and we've also got to believe that they're sufficiently knowledgeable to be able to hold us to account. And I think that's some people's experience of Ofsted inspection. Where it goes wrong is they don't have that trust in the inspector. And the stance of the inspectorate is, and I think this speaks to the point that you were just making, is not to trust schools,
Yeah.
is to see schools as inherently untrustworthy. If they don't, someone doesn't come along and check, then they'll be naughty and they'll get it wrong.
I think that's the attitude. And it's like if you're parking illegally, you know, you
Right.
and then the inspector comes and pins a ticket on you. You know, your parking is causing concern or whatever it is. Here's a fine for 100 quid or whatever. Um, yeah, it's that problem. Of course, they don't trust us. We don't trust them.
Yeah.
It's and well, I think it was it Jeremy Paxman who said when he does a political interview, he says, "Why is this effer lying to me?" You know, as the way through. So we start off with
Yes.
that sort of mistrust that we're never
Right.
going
Right.
to
Right.
get get
Yeah.
anywhere
Okay.
really.
Nice. An
Um,
effort.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, he didn't say effer. He said,
No, of course he didn't, because he's
I don't
Jeremy
know
Pax.
why. I don't know why I bleeped it. I bleeped it. I don't know why.
Yeah, you did.
It's
You did.
very good of me.
Well, you're not going to run afoul of the YouTube algorithm there, so
Oh,
that's
is that
good.
what it does?
I think. Well, I don't know.
I don't know.
Apparently, I've
Oh,
heard.
okay.
So
Um,
one of the ways that I think is quite useful to think about any system, is to look at it through the slightly scary sounding lens of cybernetics, which obviously conjures images of Doctor Who and the Cybermen and all that sort of stuff. Cybernetics literally comes from the Greek for steersman, and it's about how to steer wisely and well. And a psychometrician, a systems thinker called Stafford Beer, and I think in 2002 came up with a little axiom, which is quite a useful way of thinking about what's happening within a system. And his axiom is, the purpose of a system is what it does, or POSIWID, as it's affectionately known. So what he's saying there is that we shouldn't judge intentions, we should judge actions. That nobody, obviously, if a school's doing really badly, nobody thinks it's doing that on purpose, but their intention is functionally irrelevant. Focusing on what they do, why they're consistently coming up with poor outcomes, that should help us think about the discrepancy between what they say they want and what they're actually doing. So if we apply that idea, the purpose of a system is what it does, to Ofsted, then we can think a little bit about whether they're doing the things that they want to do and what the drift is between aim and outcome. So as we said earlier, that their main aim is improving lives by raising standards. And we then, let's think about what they do. So what are the things Ofsted do? So they publish a rubric for how they're going to judge schools. That's something that they do. They conduct these 2-day or 1.5-day inspections. They publish reports, and they also do some other stuff. They put subject reviews and things like that out. But those are all the things that they do that they intend to do, but they obviously do other things. So whether they want to or not, or whether they think they do or not, they also change school priorities. That's definitely, schools are at pains to align their practices with what they think Ofsted want them to do. They encourage performative compliance. That every inspection I've ever taken part in, and I've done a lot recently, is that we're putting on a show. You called it a game of smoke and mirrors. And from one inspection that I was at a couple of years ago, I was walking around with one of the inspectors, and I saw out of the corner of my eye a fight break out on the field, and I just steered the guy away.
Who
To
won the
make sure you
fight?
didn't see it. So
Is
that kind
the
of
fight still going
performative.
on? No one's dealt with it.
The fight, yeah, that was going on. I can't remember, but it's all about trying to guide what the inspector sees and doesn't see, and their perception of what they see and don't see.
And in a
So
day,
it
basically.
provokes this system that you've talked about, just of high stakes accountability, and with all that follows, it increases the workload and stress of people in the system. Sometimes, as we've said, sometimes with tragic outcomes. And it may well be constraining innovation and reinforcing hierarchies and shaping public perception in negative
this
ways.
is quite important. It also means that the type of person who gets promoted in schools are the type of person who perhaps the current Ofsted would approve of, or or an expert in what the current
Yeah.
Ofsted are sort of saying is de rigueur. So before we had the outstanding teacher, now we might have the outstanding curriculum leader, or whatever it is. There's certain expertise within the school that gets noted and promoted because of it.
Yeah.
And certain things that perhaps
That
get
might,
pushed to
yeah,
the wayside.
there's a sort of conformity that comes from that, isn't there?
Yeah, and innovation goes out of the window because you're trying to second guess what Ofsted like. Certain teachers have an expertise because of whatever, because they have a certain inclination to work in
Yep.
that way, or a history of working with Ofsted even, or whatever. So you are affecting the system,
For
unintended
sure.
consequences all the way through.
Unarguably, yeah, you absolutely are. It's also, I think, Martin, useful to just to think about the things that Ofsted categorically do not do. And top of that list is that they don't improve schools. It's school staff that do that. It's the people that work in the schools. So those school staff are maybe responding to inspection outcomes, but Ofsted themselves do not improve schools. They don't close performance gaps between different groups of students. Again, that's school staff that do that. They don't make schools happier and safer. that is work done by people on the ground. And I think that's really, really important to remember, that the levers that Ofsted pull, or the lever that Ofsted is, that's pulled by other people perhaps, doesn't actually get that work done.
So I come back to my point that we should abolish it and change the system and put it somewhere towards a more self-helping, generating organization, perhaps, that works with schools and through schools, if you like, that we have that. I think we have to have the report card, unfortunately, because Labour put it in their manifesto.
Well, okay. I mean, yeah.
Whether it has to be the report card as currently designed, I don't think so. But again, the idea of having a report how our school is progressing every year, and I don't, as an honest way in, and it could be that this is an honest one page of A4, and then behind that there's a lot more detail for the school inspectors, MATs, local authorities to get involved in. The other thing we could do is completely go down the route of make it every school into a competitive school, and the best attract the best and the worst attract, and fewer numbers go to that one. And that means massive overspending, far more schools than there are places, that needed. So we have a massive overinvestment. That's not going to happen. So to have a competitive system, I think, is slightly ludicrous, and a
Yeah,
supportive system would make more sense.
absolutely. Yeah. So I think the fundamental problem with the system is that, in these cybernetic terms, you could describe Ofsted as a system as exhibiting single loop learning. So its attempts to listen and consult, at best, they're tweaking the framework, they're moving around deck chairs on the Titanic. What they're not doing is questioning the underlying assumptions. And so a process that's sometimes called double loop learning is is in place when a system has the capacity to reflect on its own internal logic and adjust definitions of quality and evolve in response um, to its failure. So if you could imagine, we know how a thermostat works, sort of constantly setting the temperature, but it'd be like if a thermostat was saying, "Oh, why am I set to this temperature?" and could investigate whether a better temperature might achieve the goal
I
of.
think they would argue that when a new chief inspector comes in, that is kind of done, but it's always in the name of the
Wow.
ego of the new chief inspector,
Yeah,
isn't it? That's the
is it?
thing.
I
It's a
think I think
leadership, a leadership
I
thing
think
rather than a system thing. In other
yeah,
words,
I think
I'm the
you're
new
right.
I am. I'm
The
going to
new
change this.
the new chief inspector is under pressure, probably, to make change for change's sake. That if they just came in and went, it was all fine, we're just going to carry on, um, then they wouldn't make their splash. They wouldn't
Mm,
arguably get lucrative gigs afterwards. That they've got to go in and sort of do something in order to justify the fact that they're leading the organisation. I think that's that the same danger exists when new head teachers take over schools.
yeah, and funnily enough, it's the same with football managers. Come in, change everything, chaos ensues. A new manager comes in, changes everything, chaos ensues. But what
Yeah.
you got this year was Arnie Slot came into Liverpool, took over from Jurgen Klopp, didn't change much at all in terms of personnel. There was a certain sense of continuity. Even Jurgen Klopp and everyone knew he was coming in before Jurgen Klopp left, and they've
Stop
just
saying
won the
Jurgen
Premier
Klopp.
League. They've just won the Premier League.
Oh,
Unfortunately for us Spurs fans who've gone
okay.
the other way.
We're talking about football, are we?
Which, of course, the
Yeah.
most important sport in the world.
Right.
If
Well, I'm not going to argue about whether its relative importance as a sport, but what I would do is question the underlying assumption that sport's important. There we are. That's me exhibiting double loop learning right there in the middle of the podcast.
I could argue till the cows come home about
Of
why
course
it
you
is
can.
important, but let's
Of course
not.
you can.
But let's not.
Let's not do that. Let's not do that. Well, so let's just line up the issues of the current system and some possible alternatives. So the current system is one-off inspections, high stakes grading, schools encouraged to perform in order to show off for their inspectors. The outcome is blind to context, and it creates this sense of compliance and fear amongst the inspected. So the way forward that I imagine, instead of one-off inspections, ongoing feedback in a process like the one you described, instead of these high stakes grading and the idea that the report cards are not going to be high stakes is meaningless. So I would get rid of those judgments altogether and have nuanced narrative reports which you actually had to read in detail to kind of get the sense of what's going on.
And they're written in with the school, with the inspectorate, with the MAT and or local authority, and it's about how we improve from where we are.
Yeah,
That's
and
the
that
focus.
would take us a bit further away from performance to show off to really kind of getting under the skin of what's going on in a school.
And it's with the management, with the school.
Yeah,
That's important, not against the management, against the
exactly,
school.
which would encourage, one would hope, much more sense of reflection on both sides.
Yeah.
And growth on both sides.
Yeah.
That the inspectors learning from the schools learning from inspectors who are engaged with the system. And if that's what Ofsted looked like, if that's what, but it's not going to be like that. That's a million miles away from anything that's on the table.
And on that note,
on that sad note, it does. So Ofsted really causing concern. We're not. If we summarise our discussion, Martin, we're not optimistic, are we?
Doesn't seem like it. Let's have a cheerier thing for next week. We'll look for something cheerier.
Okay. Well, thank you ever so much for wasting an hour of or thereabouts of your life.
51 minutes.
51 minutes. Okay, so it could have been
52 now.
Sorry, this bit really
time keeps going on. We better finish, or else it'll go on to 53.
Martin, say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.